So the Bears made some more coaching news a couple of days ago with the announcement that they had hired a new defensive coordinator, um, assistant head coach and defensive line coach from the Buffalo Bills, Eric Washington. So the Chicago Bears now have an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, and oh God, here we go. Bears football! Like, transparently. I really didn't give much of a crap about who they hired as a defensive coordinator. Let's just be real here. And I know I'm not alone. You thought of it as a secondary concern, a secondary item, because you knew, more likely than not, the role was going to be limited in scope. You were much more concerned about the offensive coordinator position getting filled with the right guy, and that was filled by Shane Waldron, previously of the Seattle Seahawks in the same position for the last 3 seasons. And that was an example of a hire of, okay, they could have done worse. Fair to ask some questions about Seattle has a head coaching slot still available, and this guy not only isn't going after other head coaching jobs, isn't being considered for that one, and has to settle for an offensive coordinator slot with the Bears. It's fair to ask some questions. But hard to fully criticize, although Waldron is far from great as a play caller. He is an upgrade over the gutless one.
Put him up. Put him up. I'm an offensive coordinator. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get another job. I'm going to be an offensive coordinator again. It's in my blood. It's in my DNA. I'm going to do it, by God. I'm working up something special. They'll never see it coming. I've got the actions. I've got the plan. 1st and 10. Halfback dive.
So it's there, right? Like, the Bears did upgrade an offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator, though, how does the interview exactly go with Eric Washington? Number one, are you in any potential alleged trouble with the law, including the feds? No. 2, do you have any outstanding or previous HR issues that we should be aware of? No. 3, are you willing to just take this job and not have much nuts behind it and be subservient to the defensive-minded head coach? Yes, you're hired. Bears football! That's about the standard we're talking about here. Because Eric Washington has been around for quite a long time. Actually, this is a return trip to the Chicago Bears organization for him, as he was previously in Chicago in 2010 during the Lovie Smith regime as defensive line coach, of which he lasted all of 1 season, mind you. But he has bounced around the NFL at different spots, including in Carolina under Ron Rivera, spent a few years there, including in 2018 and 2019 as a defensive coordinator of the Panthers. What's interesting and important to note there from his time in Carolina is those 2 years that he was the defensive coordinator, the defenses weren't very good, and in particular 2019 they stunk. Additionally, back in 2018, after a 4-game losing streak, Riverboat Ron took the defensive play calling duties away from Eric Washington. He was fired after 2019, and he spent the last 4 seasons with the Bills. Whatever. So the Bears are bringing in somebody to be a defensive coordinator, a slot that went unfilled during most of the past season. Like, what does this all mean? Number one, it means that they didn't believe anybody on the staff right now deserved to be elevated to defensive coordinator. Not a great sign, in my opinion, because on the one hand, you're talking about the value of stability as an organization and continuity as an organization, but then you have to go outside of your shop. It's one thing on the offensive side of the ball, because that side of the ball needed an overhaul. But then to have to go outside of the house to find your top guy on defense, the defensive coordinator, is further indicative of the piss-poor, crappy staff that Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles constructed when they came into Chicago to start 2022. This is not earth-shattering news or a big surprise to anybody, but Bears football! Of course they would have to go outside of their coaching tree to find an offensive and defensive coordinator because they assembled a shitty staff. That's what happens when you do that. You were in a spot where you didn't promote your secondaries coach, your linebackers coach, your defensive line coach, because you didn't think any of them were worthy of the job. Flat out, period. Oh, so continuity and stability, my ass, to me that points to the lack of quality on the staff on both sides of the ball, but in this case, particularly the defensive side of the ball, which shouldn't feel like a huge surprise because, of course, Bears football. That's one thing. Number two, if Eric Washington was so great, if he was truly so great, especially being in a spot like he was with the Bills the past few years, he would have found a defensive coordinator job somewhere 1, 2, 3 years ago, especially with having some previous defensive coordinator experience. He didn't, though. So that should tell you something. He's been a defensive line coach for a long time. He might be a good defensive line coach, but there might be a reason he's been a defensive line coach for a long time, because nobody wants to give him that type of responsibility. That might be above his lane of competency, which is fair, right? Because not everybody should and can be a head coach or even an offensive or defensive coordinator. Now, obviously, this is a guy that was looking to advance his career, hence by the fact that he went after, interviewed for, and ultimately was given the Bears defensive coordinator spot. So let's not pretend like, oh, he wasn't looking to it. The vast majority of these guys, don't be dumb dicks about it, are looking to advance their career. They want more power, they want more prestige, and they certainly want more money for themselves. Don't be dumb about this. But when you look at this hire, this is nothing to get excited about, because you're basically hiring a token defensive coordinator in terms of the responsibilities, because Matt Eberflus is going to be the one calling the plays. It's still going to be Matt Eberflus's defense. At this point, what exactly is Eric Washington going to do? He's going to sit there and help construct the weekly defensive game plan and then do nothing on the sidelines come Sunday? Forgive me for not being very excited about this one. Now, granted, what quality defensive mind in their right mind would want to take a job like this? Because you have to know that Eberflus is not going to give up his control of the defensive side of the ball. Doesn't that sound like the similar opposite of Matt Nagy, who didn't want to give up control over the offensive side of the ball? Now, mind you, in general, I am not a fan of coaches that want to be coordinators at the same time that they're head coaches. I think the head coach needs a certain spot where they can be the CEO of the game. And when they are so focused on the play calling elements, they're too invested on one side of the ball, and they can sometimes miss the bigger picture. Like even the best ones, I say sometimes they shouldn't be play callers. And yet we know some of them certainly are. But to me, when I see an Eberflus and Poles make a hire like this, it makes me kind of question Eberflus, because he doesn't want to give up that control, because he knows he's in a desperate kind of prove it year, right? You're bringing in basically a seat filler that isn't going to actually have the most important responsibility for the position. And knowing that you were potentially a lame duck organization or a lame duck spot, a lot of quality candidates weren't going to come for this job anyways, because they don't want the uncertainty of potentially being 1 year done. They really don't want to come into a spot where they get the title, but they don't get the responsibility and the accountability and props that potentially goes with that, right? So, and that's reflected in this Eric Washington hire. Same Eric Washington whose defensive line was piss poor against the Chiefs in the playoffs again, even though they've invested a lot on the defensive line. So forgive me. No, this is not a move that's exciting or moves the needle in any way, shape, or form. This is just lame duck hiring for a lame duck administration and sitting there and trying to make it seem like you're doing competent things, but in the reality of it all, at the end of the day, it's just nothing more than good old-fashioned, you know it, you love it,